They said it softly, not to my face, but behind closed doors, under low light and hushed tones. He's finished. And those words, those simple, effortless words, became the shovel that started digging my grave. I could almost hear it. The sound of dirt hitting the coffin of who I used to be. The sound of footsteps walking away while I lay there motionless. Not dead, not alive, just forgotten. They didn't bury a body. They buried a version of me that no longer fit their story. They buried my kindness, my trust, my belief that loyalty meant something. And in the silence that followed, I learned something most men never do. That sometimes death is the best teacher life can send. Every betrayal felt like a nail in that coffin. Every loss, another handful of dirt. The more they buried me, the quieter I became. Until the only sound left was the faint echo of my heartbeat, not begging for life, but waiting for something inside to awaken. You see, I didn't die. Something else did, something weak, something naive, something that thought love would save me. And in its place, something ancient began to move, something forged from the silence, not afraid of it, something that didn't want to be seen anymore, only remembered. They'll never understand it, because the kind of death I faced wasn't physical. It was spiritual. It was the quiet death of being forgotten by the ones you die for. It was watching people you bled for walk away clean. It was learning that the world doesn't need your goodness. It only uses it. But when the noise stopped, when the tears dried, when the pain grew tired of screaming, I met the part of me that didn't care anymore. And that's when the rebirth began. You see, I was never supposed to survive. Not with this heart, not with this hope, not with this fire that refused to die out even when the world poured oceans over it. But I did. And that survival wasn't strength. It was defiance. Every time I breathed when I wasn't supposed to. Every time I got up when the world wanted me crawling. Every time I smiled through blood. It wasn't resilience. It was rebellion. Because sometimes life doesn't test your strength. It forges it. Through fire, through loss, through nights so silent you start talking to your own shadows. You start to understand that survival isn't a victory cry. It's a whisper. It's the sound of a man standing alone in the dark saying, "I'm still here." When they buried me, they forgot one thing. You can't kill what doesn't fear death. They thought I'd vanish, disappear quietly under the weight of their betrayal. But all they did was plant me. They turned my grave into soil, my pain into roots, my silence into a seed. And from that darkness I grew, not toward the light, but through it. Because men like me don't rise to be loved. We rise to remember. We rise because survival isn't a choice. It's a duty. To every broken version of ourselves that never got to speak. To every night that ended in tears. To every name we whispered goodbye to and never said out loud again. So yes, they dug my grave. They carved my name in stone. They wrote my ending before I even began. But when they turned their backs and walked away, they forgot the most important rule of the dark. The dead don't stay buried when their purpose is unfinished. And I was unfinished, unwritten, unbroken. Now, when I look back at the dirt they threw, I don't see death anymore. I see proof. Proof that even the grave can't hold a soul that refuses to kneel. Proof that pain isn't the end. It's the forge. And that every wound they gave me was a blade I learned to hold. So let them keep their silence. Let them whisper that I should have stayed gone. Because the truth is, I wasn't supposed to survive. That's exactly why I did. And when I finally rise from that grave, they'll realize something far worse than my death. That I learned to live without them. And that makes me unstoppable. They buried me in silence. But silence is where gods learn to breathe. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from absence. From doors that close softly. From footsteps that fade without explanation. From voices that once said, "I'll never leave," and then vanished like smoke. I used to believe in people, in promises, in loyalty. But then I learned that some people only stay long enough to take what they need. And when your heart is empty, they call you too much. They didn't stab me in the chest. They smiled while letting me bleed from the inside. That's the kind of betrayal that changes a man. Not the one that breaks him instantly, but the one that kills him slowly while he still pretends he's fine. When they turned away, it wasn't loud. No grand betrayal. No cinematic goodbye. Just the quiet sound of distance growing where warmth used to live. You start noticing things. The pauses in their sentences. The lack of eye contact. The way they start calling you by your name again. Not bro, not love, not family. That's how you know the end has already begun. I remember watching them laugh while I was drowning in silence. I remember how they carried on, as if my pain was entertainment, as if my loyalty was disposable. And I realized something cruel. They never abandoned me because I was weak. They abandoned me because I was strong, because I carried more than they could ever understand. And I did it without asking for anything back. One by one, they left. Friends, lovers, people I would have died for, all of them gone. And I had to stand there pretending it didn't hurt, because men like me aren't allowed to break in public. We just bleed behind closed doors. But here's what they didn't see. The silence they left behind didn't destroy me. It purified me. It burned away every illusion I ever held. It taught me that solitude isn't loneliness. It's truth with the volume turned up. There's a moment that every broken man faces. When he stops waiting for an apology that will never come. When he stops looking at the door hoping they'll walk back in. That's when power begins to grow. When I finally stopped expecting loyalty, I found peace in betrayal. When I stopped chasing love, I found strength in indifference. And when I stopped explaining my worth to the blind, I saw clearly for the first time. They didn't just leave me, they freed me. Because as long as I kept holding on to them, I was chained to the version of myself that begged to be seen. Now I walk alone, and for the first time it feels like home. You start to see their true faces only after the storm. When you have nothing left to give, their masks fall off. And suddenly, the people you loved look like strangers. That's when you realize they were never walking with you. They were walking beside you for convenience. And the day you stopped serving their comfort, you became their inconvenience. So they left. Not because you failed them, but because your silence started reminding them of their noise. Because your focus became a mirror that showed them their own weakness. They didn't want you gone. They just didn't want you awake. It took me years to understand this. Some people aren't loyal to you. They're loyal to the version of themselves they get to be around you. When you stop feeding that version, they starve and move on. And that's fine, because I'm done feeding ghosts. I'm done lighting fires for people who never stayed to feel the warmth. I'm done bleeding to prove I still care. They turned away, but in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift: perspective. When you've been left by everyone, you start to see how heavy your own heart really was. How much of yourself you gave away just to keep people from leaving. You start to realize, maybe survival was never about holding on. Maybe it was about letting go completely. And not caring if anyone catches you. That's when you start becoming dangerous. Because a man who has nothing left to lose becomes impossible to control. I stopped waiting for them to come back. I stopped checking if they remembered. I stopped needing closure. Because closure is just the final chain that keeps you tethered to what's already rotting. Now, when they say my name, it echoes differently. Not as a memory, but as a warning. They thought walking away would weaken me, but it only stripped away everything that wasn't real. Now there's nothing left to break, no illusions left to kill, no love left to betray. Only purpose, only hunger, only the fire that grows quietly in the chest of the forgotten. They don't know it yet, but the silence they left me in became my battlefield. Because while they were running from pain, I was learning to walk with it. While they were searching for comfort, I was sharpening my soul on the edges of loneliness. And now, when they look into my eyes, they'll see the cost of betrayal staring back at them. Calm, unbothered, immortal. They turned away from me, but I learned to walk through fire without leaving footprints. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It hums, quietly, like a storm that forgot how to end. That's what brokenness feels like. It's not the dramatic fall people imagine. It's the slow collapse you go through while the world keeps moving. Smiling, laughing, pretending not to see your bones turning to dust beneath your skin. You start waking up in the same body but not in the same soul. You breathe, but it doesn't feel like life. You move, but every step feels like walking through glass. You talk, but your words echo in an empty cathedral no one visits anymore. They say time heals, but they never tell you that time is also a killer. Because with every passing day, you realize how much of you has already died, and how much is still pretending to be alive. You try to rebuild, but you can't remember who you were before the collapse. You look in the mirror, and the reflection stares back like a stranger wearing your face. You whisper, "Who am I now?" But the voice doesn't answer. It just fades into the static of your thoughts. Brokenness has layers. First comes the pain, then comes the numbness, and then comes the silence that eats you alive. At first you fight it. You try to stay busy, try to drown it with noise, with people, with meaningless distractions. But eventually you learn that silence doesn't leave. You have to sit with it. You have to listen to it. Because hidden underneath the ache is the truth. And the truth is cruel. The truth is that the person you used to be can't survive the man you're becoming. There's a kind of night that never ends. Not because the sun refuses to rise, but because you refuse to open your eyes. I remember those nights, sitting alone in a room filled with memories that smelled like betrayal, replaying every moment, every word, every "I love you" that turned into a ghost sentence. I tore myself apart trying to understand why it happened, why they did what they did, why I wasn't enough. Until I realized, some things don't break because of weakness. They break because they were meant to evolve. I stopped blaming them. I stopped blaming myself. And I started watching the pieces. Each one, a scar, a memory, a lesson. I studied my own ruins like a scientist of pain. And I realized, maybe I was never broken. Maybe I was being sculpted. Because if you look closely, every fracture is a design. Every wound a blueprint. Every tear a message from the universe whispering, "This is where the light will enter when you're ready." But don't get it twisted. Healing isn't pretty. It's not yoga mats and sunlight. It's screaming into your pillow until your throat burns. It's shaking hands trying to pick yourself up off the floor. It's eating in silence because no one asks how you're doing anymore. It's staring at the wall, wondering if this is who you'll be forever. And then, somewhere between the tears and the silence, you stop asking, "Why me?" You start asking, "What now?" That's the shift. That's where pain turns into power. Pain doesn't vanish. It transforms. Like fire. It can burn you alive, or it can forge you into something indestructible. It depends on whether you run from it or walk through it. So I stopped running. I let it consume me. Every memory, every betrayal, every lie. I fed it all to the flames. And somewhere deep inside the smoke, I heard a voice, my own, whispering, "Now we begin." The anatomy of brokenness isn't about falling apart. It's about discovering who you are when there's nothing left to protect. It's the death of the mask, the burial of illusions, the rebirth of truth. Because only when everything collapses, only when every false part of you burns away, do you meet the man buried underneath the ashes. The one who doesn't beg anymore. The one who doesn't chase. The one who no longer seeks validation because pain became his crown. I used to think broken meant finished, but now I know. Broken means begun. The cracks aren't proof of weakness. They're proof that I survived the impact. And if I can survive the fall, then the climb is inevitable. So when you see me quiet, when you see me distant, don't mistake it for defeat. Understand this. I am rebuilding in silence. Every breath, every heartbeat, every scar. A piece of armor being forged in the fire they left me in. I'm not the man I was. That man died the moment they turned away. This one was born from the wreckage. And when I rise, the world will understand what real resurrection looks like. I was never broken. I was being redesigned by the hands of my own pain. There's a moment after the breaking, when everything inside you goes still. Not peaceful, just empty. It's the calm that comes after destruction, not because the storm ended, but because there's nothing left to destroy. And in that emptiness, something ancient starts to move. A flicker, a breath, a sound that isn't quite a scream, but isn't silence either. That's the sound of the fire returning. At first it's small, just a spark buried beneath the rubble of who you used to be. It doesn't roar yet. It whispers. It says, "Get up." You don't even know why you listen. You've lost everything that once mattered. You've buried every reason to keep fighting. But still, you rise. Not because it makes sense, but because somewhere in your bones, something refuses to die quietly. That's when you realize you weren't broken to end. You were broken to ignite. They thought they buried you, but you were only underground because that's where fire is born. In pressure, in heat, in silence. While they moved on, you were transforming. While they celebrated your death, you were becoming immortal. You stopped chasing hope. You stopped begging for closure. You stopped caring about fairness. And in that stillness, you found something purer than peace. You found purpose. You look around and realize pain didn't destroy you. It stripped you down to your core until only the truth remained. And that truth was brutal. It whispered, "No one is coming. No one ever was." At first, it hurts to accept. Then it liberates you. Because once you stop waiting for a savior, you become one. Once you stop asking for light, you remember you were fire all along. That's when the spark grows. That's when the whisper becomes a roar. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every night you thought would kill you, you feed it to the flame, and it doesn't hurt anymore. It burns clean. You start to feel it, that strange hunger for more. Not more comfort, more power. Not the kind that controls others, the kind that commands yourself. You realize self-discipline is revenge. That the weight on your shoulders isn't punishment, it's the forge. And every repetition, every drop of sweat, every lonely morning when you refuse to quit, is another nail in the coffin of your old weakness. You stop being afraid of pain. You start inviting it. Because now you understand, pain is proof that the transformation is working. That you're still alive. That the ashes weren't your grave, they were your birthplace. You don't need their approval anymore. You don't crave their love. You don't seek their understanding. You've outgrown it all. You've become too vast to fit inside their small imaginations. And then one day you wake up different. Not happier, not healed, just sharper. Your mind, cold steel. Your eyes, calm storms. Your heart, still, burning, but this time with control. You realize you no longer react, you calculate. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer cry, you command. You've turned your pain into strategy, your silence into focus, your rage into energy. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are becoming the one who chooses. They'll call you cold now. They'll say you changed. And they're right. Because once you've burned in your own fire and survived, you stop apologizing for the smoke. They used to mistake your kindness for weakness. Now they mistake your silence for arrogance. Let them. They don't need to understand the language of the reborn. You're not here to explain. You're here to exist. Loudly, powerfully, unapologetically. Every scar is a scripture now. Every wound is an oath. Every betrayal is a weapon you carry quietly beneath your calm. And when the world sees you again, they'll think you're new. But you'll know you're not new. You're the same soul, finally unmasked. You stopped praying for rescue. You built an altar to your own will. You stopped searching for light. You became it. You stopped saying, "Why me?" Now you say, "Watch me." Because the truth is, you were never meant to survive peacefully. You were meant to rise violently from the ruins, from the silence, from the ashes, and make them remember your name. You used to fear losing everything. Now loss is your language. Now pain is your birthplace. Now survival is your art. And that fire they tried to bury, it's not just burning, it's learning to speak. Soon, the world will hear it roar. They thought they buried my fire, but they forgot. Ashes remember. Every man faces two wars, one against the world and one against himself. The first is loud, swords, betrayal, noise. But the second is silent. No witnesses, no applause, no mercy. Just you, standing in front of the mirror, staring at the enemy wearing your own face. That's the war that decides everything. Because until you conquer the voice inside that says quit, you'll keep losing battles that never even needed to be fought. I fought that war for years. The war between who I was and who I refused to die as. Fear whispered that I was done. Pain laughed that I'd never rise again. Doubt said I was too late. And I believed them for a while. Until I realized those voices weren't mine. They were echoes of everyone who wanted me weak. The ghosts of every betrayal that ever told me I was nothing. So I silenced them, not by arguing, but by acting. You see, there's a strange peace that comes when you stop running from your demons and start training them. When you stop hiding your anger and start shaping it. When you stop wishing for light and start building in the dark. Pain became my gym. Fear became my coach. Discipline became my religion. Every rep, every lonely night, every drop of sweat, it was all part of the ritual. And with every repetition, I was reforging the weapon that is me. People talk about self-love, but I learned something harder, self-respect. Because love is easy when you feel good. Respect is what you earn when you drag yourself through hell and still refuse to give up. There were days I wanted to quit, when my body screamed, when my mind begged for rest, when every voice said, "What's the point?" But then something inside growled back, "Because I said so." And that was enough. Sometimes you don't need motivation. You need a command. You need to look at yourself and say, "We keep going." Not because it's easy, not because it's fun, but because quitting is the language of the weak. And I burned that language out of my mouth long ago. I realized I didn't need revenge on others. I needed revenge on the version of me that believed them. The one who begged to be chosen. The one who accepted less. The one who thought survival meant staying silent. No. Now survival means domination. It means mastering myself so completely that no betrayal can shake me again. You see, Real power isn't loud. It's not screaming or proving. It's control. It's restraint. It's standing in a storm and saying, I built this weather. Every man has to meet the beast inside, the one buried beneath guilt, under weakness, under years of being too afraid to become who he truly is. When you finally face that beast, don't kill it, command it, because the beast isn't your curse, it's your crown. I stopped trying to heal my rage. I learned to wield it. I turned my anger into energy, my hatred into hunger, my loneliness into focus. That's what transformation is. Not killing your darkness, but training it to obey you. I started living differently, waking before the sun, training when no one watched, moving in silence. Every day, another small victory. Every night, another scar that meant progress. And slowly, the war began to shift. The voices grew quieter. The pain started working for me instead of against me. The fire burned steady, controlled, deliberate, powerful. Because the truth is, discipline isn't punishment. It's liberation. It's how you build freedom brick by brick, not by waiting for life to get easier, but by getting stronger than what's in your way. You don't rise once. You rise every day. Every morning you get up when you don't want to, that's a resurrection. Every time you say no to weakness, that's rebirth. Every time you choose silence over proving, that's ascension. You become dangerous when you master yourself, because nothing can be taken from a man who no longer needs anything. No validation, no applause, no audience, just the mission, just the work, just the voice inside that whispers Ashwo, we are not done yet. Now I understand. The enemy was never them. It was me, my hesitation, my fear, my dependence on their approval. They can betray you. They can abandon you. They can lie. But none of it matters if you never betray yourself again. That's what the war within taught me. That peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the mastery of chaos. It's the ability to carry the storm inside and still walk calm through the fire. I've lost count of how many battles I've fought with myself. But I know this, every time I win, the world loses control over me. Because once you've disciplined your demons, nothing outside of you can destroy you. And the man who can't be destroyed, can't be controlled, that's the new me. Not healed, not perfect, just unbreakable. They thought my silence meant surrender, but it was the sound of a man training his demons to kneel. When the noise stopped and the world grew silent around me, I didn't call it loneliness anymore. I called it freedom, because that's what silence becomes when you stop fearing it. It turns from a void into a kingdom. I built my empire there, not of gold, not of glory, but of control. Control over my emotions, control over my mind, control over the chaos that used to command me. In that silence, I stopped reacting. I started ruling. And I realized something no one had ever told me. The loudest one in the room is rarely the strongest. The calm one is. The one who doesn't need to prove anything. The one who already knows he's won. I made myself immortal in that silence. Not by escaping pain, but by learning how to hold it without letting it consume me. Every wound they gave me, I turned into a wall. Every scar became a scripture. Every night I spent alone was another brick in the throne I was building. Brick by brick, breath by breath, in the darkness they thought would bury me. That's how kings are made, not crowned by others but carved by isolation. The world worships noise. They chase attention, validation, recognition. But I learned something deeper. When you stop begging to be seen, the universe starts watching. When you stop screaming for love, respect starts to whisper your name. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives in silence and rearranges the room without saying a word. That's what I became. Not the man they remembered, the man they feared. Because I no longer needed their applause, their names, their opinions, their judgments. None of it mattered anymore. I became the ghost in the empire they built without me. The reminder of what happens when a man rises in solitude. I remember every night I sat alone, hands trembling, breath heavy, feeling like the world had ended. And now, when I stand in that same silence, there's no fear left. Only calm, because I realized the world didn't end. I did. The weak me, the desperate me, the man who waited for permission to rise. He's gone, and the one who took his place doesn't wait anymore. He decides. I used to want revenge. I used to want to prove them wrong. But when I started mastering myself, I outgrew revenge. Because you can't seek vengeance on those who no longer exist in your reality. I don't want their apologies. I don't want their validation. I want silence. Because silence means I've surpassed them. Now I speak less, move slower, think deeper. Because power doesn't rush, it watches, it studies, it strikes once, and it never misses. In that silence, I found God, not the one they preached about, but the one that lives inside the stillness of discipline. I realized creation and destruction speak the same language. The only difference is who's holding the fire. And I hold it now. Calm, steady, controlled. The same fire that once burned me alive now lights my path. The same darkness that once swallowed me whole now bends to my will. This isn't revenge anymore. This is evolution. This is ascension through stillness. When I walk now, people sense something they can't explain. It's not confidence, it's command. It's the aura of someone who's seen hell and learned to make it home. Because once you've mastered your inner world, the outer world becomes irrelevant. They can talk, they can doubt, they can leave. It doesn't matter. Because when you learn to be complete alone, no one can break you again. Silence taught me things pain never could. It taught me how to observe before reacting, how to listen to my own intuition, louder than anyone else's voice, how to become unshakable, unmovable, untouchable. And that's when I realized immortality isn't about living forever. It's about living in such a way that even silence speaks your name. I became the storm they whispered about, the calm before chaos, the eye that watches, not the wind that screams. Because kings don't need to announce war. Their presence is the declaration. They thought silence was weakness. They thought isolation would finish me. But all it did was turn me into something they can't define. A man who doesn't need the world anymore. That's the highest form of freedom, to want nothing, and to become everything. Now, when I look back at what they did, the betrayals, the lies, the abandonment, I don't feel hate. I feel gratitude, because without them, I'd still be soft, still be waiting, still be human. But now, I'm something else. They killed the boy, but in doing so, they awakened the crown. When you build yourself in silence, the world doesn't see the process. They only see the result. And they'll call it sudden. They'll call it luck. They'll call it destiny. But you'll know it was discipline. It was patience. It was blood turned into purpose. You didn't pray for this power. You earned it in a place where no one clapped, no one believed, no one cared. And that's why it's yours. Because anything forged in silence belongs only to the one who endured it. They buried me in noise, but I built my empire in silence. And now when I finally stepped back into the world, it didn't recognize me. The same streets, the same faces. But everything had changed. Because I had. The world that once broke me, the world that watched me fall, now stood still. Not because it cared, but because it sensed something different, something untouchable. I didn't need to announce my return. I didn't need to prove I had risen. My silence said enough. My eyes carried the story, and my presence spoke the language only survivors understand. When you've rebuilt yourself in the dark, the light no longer blinds you. You walk through the noise like a ghost wearing armor. People stare, but they don't know what they're seeing. They call it confidence, but it's not. It's clarity. I no longer see the world as home or enemy. I see it for what it truly is, a stage, and I play my role now with precision. No emotion wasted, no movement random. Every word, every silence, measured like a blade. The people who left me behind now whisper my name again. Not out of love, out of curiosity, out of fear, out of realization. They don't see the man they abandoned. They see the consequence of their choices. They see what happens when betrayal becomes fuel, when silence becomes a weapon, when pain becomes prophecy. They stare, trying to recognize me. But how could they? The version they left in the dirt no longer exists. That man was buried. This one was born beneath the burial. I don't talk about revenge anymore. Revenge is for those who still need closure. I don't, because vengeance loses its meaning when the throne you built is higher than their reach. They tried to erase me. Now they live in the shadow of my name. They tried to bury me. Now I walk on the soil of their doubts. They tried to silence me, but my silence echoes louder than their noise ever did. The beauty of rising in silence is that no one knows how to stop you anymore. They can't predict your moves. They can't read your intentions. They can't find your weakness. Because the man who has already lost everything fears nothing. That's my greatest weapon now. Fearlessness. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits, the kind that smiles while others tremble, the kind that moves mountains without needing to make a sound. When I pass them now, I see guilt in their eyes, regret, unspoken apologies that will never reach my ears, and I don't need them to. Because forgiveness isn't mercy anymore. It's dominance. I don't forgive to heal. I forgive to end the chapter completely. They can keep their excuses, their explanations, their versions of the truth. I've outgrown their narratives. I write my own now, in silence, in scars, in legacy. The same people who called me nothing now imitate my steps. The same ones who mocked my pain now preach about strength. The same ones who walked away now orbit around the empire I built. But they'll never understand the cost. They'll never comprehend the nights I faced myself with blood on my hands and fire in my chest. They'll never feel what it's like to become what they were too afraid to be. So I let them watch. I let them whisper, because the greatest revenge is becoming the lesson they never wanted to learn. I don't seek validation anymore. I don't need applause. Silence became my audience. Pain became my teacher. Discipline became my faith. Now I walk differently. Not faster, not louder, just heavier. Like every step carries the weight of everything I survived. And maybe it does, because every step I take now is on the bones of who I used to be. And I honor that man, not with grief, but with greatness. The world doesn't know what to do with a man who no longer needs it. They can't manipulate him, can't guilt him, can't control him. Because once you've lived through your own death, you stop fearing theirs. And that's where true freedom begins. Not in victory, not in love, in detachment, in knowing that nothing they take from you can hurt you anymore. I became untouchable the moment I realized I was never theirs to begin with. When I speak now, I speak with calm authority. Not to be heard, but to be remembered. When I look at them, I don't see enemies. I see teachers who didn't know they were teaching me. When I stand before the world, I don't stand to fight anymore. I stand to rule. Because I didn't just survive, I evolved. I didn't just rise, I returned. And the world that forgot me now remembers me in silence. They forgot me when I was human. Now they remember me as myth. They called me cursed once. Damned, broken beyond repair. And they were right. But what they never understood was that the damned don't die. They adapt. They become what the light could never teach them to be. Because when you lose everything, you stop fearing loss. When you're cast into the pit, you stop begging for heaven. You learn to see clearly in the dark. And that's when you realize darkness was never your enemy. It was your inheritance. They crowned the righteous with gold. They crowned the chosen with glory. But me, I forged my crown from bones, from betrayal, from every night the world left me bleeding. That's why it glows the way it does, not with light, but with memory. Every scar is a jewel, every sin a stone, every defeat a spike in the crown of the damned, and I wear it proudly, because I earned it, not through mercy, but through madness. The world worships survival, but they don't understand what it costs. They think strength is a roar, but strength is the whisper that keeps breathing when your soul has already burned away. They see my calm now, but not the wars I had to fight to earn it. They see my crown, but not the fire it was baptized in. They see my rise, but not the graves I had to climb out of to reach it. Let them see the glory. They couldn't handle the pain anyway. Because those who survive the impossible are never the same again. They carry a different rhythm. Their silence hits differently. Their eyes tell stories that no words can translate. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see a man. I see a myth sculpted by suffering. I see every version of myself that died, standing behind me like an army of ghosts, each whispering the same truth. You were chosen by the fire. You can't teach what I've become. You can't fake it. You can't imitate it. Because this kind of power is born only in the ruins. It's the kind that crawls through the dirt and learns to love the taste of blood and silence. They call me heartless now, but I didn't lose my heart. I reforged it. I turned it into iron. Now it beats with rhythm, not emotion. Purpose, not pain. And that purpose is simple. Never fall again. The crown of the damned isn't given. It's claimed. It's taken by those who suffered in silence and came back sharper than before. It's worn by those who realized that heaven isn't for the pure. It's for the unbreakable. You see, they think the darkness consumed me. But the truth is, I became its king. I stopped fighting it. I started listening to it. And it told me the one secret that changed everything. You don't conquer darkness. You learn to walk with it. That's what I did. I walked through it. I walked with it. And when I reached the other side, I didn't come out clean. I came out holy, but not in their way. In mine. There's a divinity in pain the world doesn't talk about. Sacred transformation that happens when everything is stripped away and only your will remains. That's where gods are born, not in temples, but in torment. Not through blessings, but through breaking. I was never meant to be saved. I was meant to be forged. In betrayal, in loss, in silence, in fire. And when the flames finally died, I didn't crawl out. I walked out, with my head high and my crown burning. The crown of the damned isn't heavy. It's honest. It doesn't demand worship. It demands respect. Because it's not built from gold. It's built from truth. From the bones of every false hope I ever buried. From the ashes of every dream I had to kill to stay alive. And when I wear it, I don't feel pride. I feel peace. Because I know what it cost. And I know no one can ever take it from me. So let the world keep chasing crowns made of comfort. Let them trade their souls for approval. Let them kneel for validation. I've knelt before fire. I've bled for silence. I've died for my own rebirth. That's why when I stand now, it's not as a survivor. It's as something else, something eternal. Because when you've worn the crown of the damned, you no longer need permission to rule. You simply do. They thought the darkness would destroy me, but I learned to sit on its throne. They thought the fire would burn me, but it forged my halo. They thought death would silence me, but my voice became the echo in every man who refused to quit. I was crowned in hell, and that's why heaven kneels when I speak.